All right. Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the webinar on the practicality of digital transformation, actionable steps to get started. Before we do get started, I just want to let you know that we've opened up the chat window, and please feel free to identify yourselves, where you're from, but equally important, please ask questions. We want the webinar to be interactive. The speakers are going to be watching the chat log as well as myself. And we will, any question that doesn't get answered during the webinar, we'll answer after the webinar and get it distributed to everybody. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists. We have a great lineup of panelists with many years of experience in business transformation of all types. And they're here to share their insights on how to take this digital transformation and turn it into reality. So with that, I'll hand it over to Craig to do his introduction. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Ed. My name's Craig Bachmann, and been involved with digital transformation for over 40 years across a number of industries: ICT, music, media, energy, utilities, cities, governments, and GIS stuff. And over those 40 years have I guess built a number of companies to address digital transformation directly from a variety of roles. And so in the last 10 years have been involved with the TM Forum as an advisor in developing programs around the capabilities and APIs and new architectures, ecosystem modeling, and platforms around digital transformation. And these days, 2 years ago, we started a new company, purpose-built, to connect the dots in digital transformation, and that company is called Tessellate Advisory, and it is a group of independent consultants that collaborate from around the planet. So pleased to be here.
Yeah, go ahead, William.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. My name is William Carter, and I've built a 25-plus year career working with various technology, telecommunications, and service-oriented corporations. Today, I'm currently president and CEO and founder of a company, Advanced 360 Solutions, where we're just having a great time helping our customers move forward and experience success across areas of expertise that include strategic planning. Digital transformation is clearly important to them, so it's clearly important to us, and that's a good area that's consuming a significant amount of our time. Legacy system and technical development, financial modeling, as well as vendor management. And we're just here to and looking forward to participate in today's conversation with this great panel.
All right, John.
Hi, everyone. John Fiorendino from Dallas, Texas. I've been involved in digital transformation since 1982, when I formed a company to help 170 small businesses move from paper-based accounting to the first IBM mid-range computers that were available to businesses. I've been involved in some major transformations that involve everything from banks doing client-server computing for customer service agents, banks moving from paper-based check processing to fully electronic image processing with no check movement at all, and exciting things in healthcare, where we moved people from paper-based accounting to some of the first automated systems in large enterprises like Tenet Health. I've been very fortunate to be exposed to some great opportunities in my almost 40 years of time in the industry, and I look forward to sharing some insights with the team.
Okay, and finally, Kevin, if you could go.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, Kevin McCaffrey, CEO of Trident. I guess I've been involved in digital transformation for quite a while, but I actually didn't know that that's what it was called when it started. You know, we've gone through terms like digital revolution, which has been kind of made more correct in terms of things like digital transformation these days. But strong background in financial services, and then on into the telco space, where done a lot of work also with the TM Forum and been involved with Craig for quite a while. As part of that, Craig and I had worked together probably 5, 6, 7 years ago in the whole concept of what was B2B to X, and then how that evolved into business ecosystems. And we identified that, in the telco space, service providers were changing their way of doing business, but we needed a way to help them. And actually, as a result of that gap, we created a product called Transformation Accelerator, or Curate FX, that is kind of a platform to help organizations with digital transformation. So, really today, I guess the purpose is more on the practicality. I don't know about everybody else, but you just hear so many buzzwords about digital transformation, and especially as a result of the pandemic, a lot of organizations are having to change and having to look at different things. So I think it should be a really interesting discussion with the guys, and very happy to be here. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, well, let's get started. And I'm going to direct the first question to Craig. And as many of you said, we're living in this crazy, pandemic, post-pandemic world that's created a lot of chaos. And so Craig, what's your advice on how to get people thinking about digital transformation and kind of where to start? And so I'll hand it over to you with that big question.
That's all.
That's all.
That's all. Oh, $3 trillion worth of transformation per year in the next 5 minutes. People talk about theory, but it's not really theory of all of this. I think a lot of organizations has put together, pragmatic playbooks, but they're based on patterns that have been established over the years, and when you think about transformation, I mean, we're witnessing a month where Branson and Bezos went to space, right? I mean, this is the world is moving at a rapid pace, and so a very strict formulated playbook based on patterns with X amount of dimensions, and what's been successful in that are interesting bits. Also advice on how to address red and blue oceans and leverage platforms and all of that are all good stuff as a starting high level thing. But in order to make this really work, first of all, work with one of the guys on the panel. 2, set up a PMO. All of this is very decentralized. And what we have found over all of the work throughout the years and all of this, that digital is distributed very unevenly throughout the business part, the technical part, and the markets, with all of companies and governments and so on. It's really uneven distribution. So one of the main tricks is pragmatically, how do you pull together all of these decentralized or siloed pieces and pull them together so that you can balance all of these things? And we recommend a PMO. We also, obviously, not just because of working with Kevin, but just the idea of modeling the context is super important. The ecosystems both internally to an organization and external, because without that you won't know who's got the value stream in their hands, who pays who does what, and so on. So that is a very pragmatic piece of modeling the ecosystems. The other is a very pragmatic is modeling the finances. One of the big changes in all of this is how do you financially model this digital transformation as opposed to the previous ones. And with that, you can get your people, process, and system gaps identified so that you can create kind of a roadmap approach that is both agile but pays attention to the context of what the company is facing. So that's kind of the quick list. And I'm sure these guys are quite adept at explaining each one of those from their position. So,
You know, Craig, I appreciate your comments about complexity and the need for a systemic approach. I've watched over the last 40 years as the complexity of technical projects has gone from one computer from IBM, half the time software from IBM, and somebody to implement it. Now, my company's dealing with ecosystems of technology companies that may be a dozen different technology providers. So coordinating and being systematic about how you look at your stakeholders and co-participants in a transformation is an essential thing that you just can't avoid the complexity today. My suggestion is to embrace it rather than to hide from it.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd like to add as well on that, John, is and Craig, is that I think a lot of times when people talk about digital transformation, there's huge emphasis on the digital part of it, and which kind of implies technology, and that becomes the focal point. Now, you do see a lot of organizations where the digital transformation activities or initiatives are being run out of the CTO office or the CIO office rather than necessarily anywhere else. But the reality is that now it to your point about the PMO or maybe the DXO, the digital transformation office, there has to be a coordinated effort on this. There needs to be, in the same way as you're doing projects, but the skills and the expertise around a PMO are specific, but at a digital level and a transformational level, there's a different skill set. But what's more important isn't that you just have a bunch of project managers. You definitely don't want that. What you actually want to be starting looking at is how do we get representatives from the key business units, because it's about getting those business and those technical people talking, where you actually start generating those nuggets of valuable new knowledge and insights that will help the organization.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on this. I think the panel has already highlighted some very significant pieces, all of which are extremely important. I think that what we found is, in addition to all that's been managed, is understanding as well as expectations. There is a facet where some companies have made the unfortunate mistake of just treating this as a niche project, and it is not a project. This is a journey, and it's one that you need deep collaboration, understanding, and commitment from top down. I'm not just saying just from a department to department. I suggest having input from boardroom all the way down to administrative staff. It's a transformation, and getting the right people involved and understanding what it means for everyone, because it'll mean something different for everyone. Understanding what that'll mean and those impacts is also a very, very important element that can't be forgotten.
And
Totally agree. And the fact, I think we all can acknowledge, there's no end state here, right? There's no end state at all in a world, again, where executives are going to space for PR. There is no end state here. This will continue to keep changing. Absolutely agree that a pragmatic approach is the top-down model, but what we find with the ecosystems is that it's not a hierarchy anymore, right? It's a collaboration across so many stakeholders and so many companies, and that each one of those ecosystem sectors are likely to go through incredible amount of change just in the next few months, never mind the next 18 months. And it's so uneven. You must find this as well, that some, maybe the call center is not up to speed, but people are using drones to do field surveys, and all of this is happening at the same time, even though it's very uneven in terms of the digital transformation.
Indeed.
Yeah, Craig, one thing I would add is that what has not changed, people spend money on kit. They buy hardware, they buy software, but the biggest investment into digital transformation is procedural, right? I remember taking some of the first city clerks from paper-based utility billing to automated billing. I mean, the investment wasn't hardware and software. The investment was in change management and getting your people ready to embrace this new technology. So as we think about the whole reference architecture, people are as much a part of it as technology and process.
I love that. That's a really good point, John. When you think about it, it was about deploying a couple servers or CPU for faster, more efficient processing, but you cannot minimize the impact on people. In fact, you can argue that the digital part is the technology piece, the transformation is the people. You have to be prepared to make the investment to upscale your personnel so that they're aware of what it means and how to leverage it to maximize value. And when I say people, sure, I'm absolutely talking about personnel, but I'd also like to not forget about one of the most important elements, and that's your customers. You want to put them in position to be able to maximize the use of your new products and service and or technology so that they also get the absolute best and highest return out of any investments that you make.
Yeah, I think, and there's a good comment in there. Support there from to your point, John, from Mike White, who I know, about the fact that it's people, and I know this. We talked about kind of key topics. We each wanted to kind of threads to talk about, and I know one of the area that you're very passionate about is culture, and the impact that culture and the people have, again, as one of those key pillars associated with the journey of digital transformation. So maybe kind of shed some light or some ideas or some thoughts on what your experiences are there and what people should kind of look at maybe.
Yeah, we're learning that even the largest of companies are recognizing that if you bring 12 companies together to create a brand or an identity of that consolidated solution, you got 11 or 12 different cultures. Each company is very different. I mean, at one point I managed HP's relationship to Cisco, two very different cultures, right? Now you start melding 12, 13 companies together, each with a culture of their own. There's certainly room for conflict, right? So then we need to be purposeful about understanding what that change management process looks like, understanding that the constituents of an ecosystem have all kind of shared with us that they want to brand the collective offering with its own unique identity. So we're no longer talking about how does culture A work well with culture B, but how do A and B create culture C representing the identity of the joint product that they're offering. So this has been a focus that my company has been working on lately. We've created a relationship with a 40-year-old firm out of Europe called Hofstede Insights that started off looking at national culture, and they've evolved their surveys into looking more at organizational culture dynamics and, most importantly, trust. I mean, one of the things that makes these ecosystems successful is the component partners trust each other. And if you don't have those fundamental elements, no matter how much you try, you're not going to succeed.
No, that's very true. I think, yeah, I remember Craig and I having discussions about that whole concept of trust and within the ecosystem partners. What about, somebody's out there and they're saying, well, look, we know the organization is going to change. We know we got to start dealing with a bunch of other people. We need to put together some kind of plan and figure out what the heck we're going to do. So what are the kind of things people, sometimes it's more about the questions they need to start asking and thinking about rather than, because the answers may differ and will probably differ per organization and depending on the types of relationships. But I always believe it's kind of more about the question than the answer. And if you can help people with them thinking of the question that they hadn't thought of before, that's gold.
I mean, Kevin, enrolling your stakeholders from the very beginning makes them a part of the outcome. They don't resist the transformation because they're integral to it. I've worked for some large companies like HP that had fantastic change management. As we went through major transformations, they prepared the team to know how to react to those transformations. And I think, again, back to the people, you've got to look, it's going to be impactful on them. And the more you can enroll them in the process, and that's where I say embrace the complexity, because these ecosystems are amazingly complex. And there are a lot of stakeholders, and tools like Trident help us to catalog those stakeholders, keep their needs and desires in mind as we are driving through the transformation. So vitally essential that you focus on the people aspect.
And I think, William, on your side, you do a lot of work at that corporate stakeholder level, and what are your kind of thoughts on that as well, on that engagement process? Because, historically, a lot of organizations, especially I'm going to say legacy or older organizations, there's a lot of little fiefdoms, there's a lot of little silos, and to kind of break down some of those barriers can be a challenge.
Oh, it's significant, but it is terribly important that you do that. When you think about it, it's unfortunate that in some cases culture and even planning in some cases can be understated, even minimized. And I believe, and we believe, that that's a terrible mistake. It must be factored in from the beginning. Why? Well, it defines your beliefs. Defines how you're going to engage. It defines how you're going to interact with stakeholders, your customers, how you're going to even do trouble resolution. We talk about this not being just transactional. Digital transformation is much larger than that. And so setting the stage and having some clarity on how you will deal with those issues at the beginning is terribly important to minimizing and making sure that you're able to move forward. And when I also think about, in this case, when you think about planning, even strategic planning or your plan relative to a digital transformation, while there's some key components that may be similar, it's also hyper personalized and unique for each organization. And make no mistake about it, I highly recommend that you do not miss the planning phase. Even if you're moving, if you're falling behind, pause, pull up the emergency brake, jump in and complete the planning to set some expectations. Why? Well, it depends. It defines your short and long-term directives, your business goals relative to some of the activities needed to be successful, your corporate priorities. We talked about funding requirements, your operating models, maybe even your human resources requirements. I kind of analogize it to an orchestra and it being the sheet of music that keeps everyone playing harmoniously. Can you imagine each of you, if you will, being the maestro and you're stepping up and you've got this massive orchestra standing before you, but there is no sheet of music. While you may be able to pull it off with an experienced group, you will not do so as effectively and efficiently as you can. And that's the sheet of music that ensures that everyone is playing and working harmoniously, efficiently, and returning and ensure that you're going to get value out of this effort.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I was just waiting for Craig to take the guitar and maybe start bursting into tune there when you mentioned the orchestra. But no, I think so. But I guess the other one then as well is Craig, is that getting that executive buy-in, and you've got to have, there has to be that sponsor, there has to be that mindset change and that leadership. And what about organizations which are kind of stuck in their ways of doing things, and how you do need that, because it's going to take time, it's going to take resources, which means money, so
Well, yeah, absolutely. And obviously one of the things we've been working with organizations is how to do the financial engineering around the digital transformation, because things don't roll back to CapEx and OpEx the way they used to. And there is very different ROIs associated with the digital transformation and hidden costs, right? So it's not only the people thing, and which is by far the largest issue, but as you go through, how do you financially model the ROI here and the costs over time and yet still stay agile and so on? And what's the premium do you put on agility and so on? So this is, I usually think about, out of all of this, the CFO people and the budget people, to make sure that they have a template that they're working with that is relevant to digital transformation, as opposed to classic MBA style, what's the ROI on this? Because it has to be explained in a different way, because it is about preparing and being adaptable to the future.
And I think obviously with ecosystems and, organizations are looking at, they have to look at different types of business models, different types of partnering. And also, one of the things that I'm, talking to somebody recently is, where if they're looking at changing their business, where should they start? How do they make sure they're not left behind? And what's the starting point? And quite often when I'm talking to people about that, I'm saying, well, the first thing you got to think about is your customer, or start on the outside and work in. Like, we're all old enough to remember when any of these transformation projects were actually just technology projects. They weren't anything else. They were like, let's stick in the new piece of kit. The latest version of enterprise product XYZ. And oh, by the way, business, yeah, here are the features you're going to get. And yeah, you need to update your business processes. That's the way it was. And it's now, you got to flip that completely around, because it's actually, you've got to look at it from your customer, listening to your customer, listening to your your end users, what are your partners, or whatever organization type you're involved with, and work from what is the value, what are they looking at. And one fortunate or unfortunate wrinkle in this as well is that as we exit the pandemic, there is a new normality. So the business traveler their expectations now are very different from what they were 18 months ago. Or people who are in the retail business who would, you look at the amount of online shopping versus, people who would never go to shop online before. So as people are exiting, you're looking at coming out of the pandemic, there is, you hear people talking about, digital DX2 2.0, which is what happens afterwards, because it's a new normality versus what's happening kind of in this kind of gray area, let's say, between full lockdown and as we come out. So I don't know, anybody got any kind of thoughts or?
Kevin, you've heard me talk before about the focus of technology vendors has recently been about how to consummate the sale. They spend hundreds of a big top tier vendor of technology may have $100 million budget for market development for its partners. They are forming these ecosystems. But what I've not seen enough emphasis on is what you spend all that money to consummate the sale, but let's not think about what a joint delivery model looks like. So some of what I'm talking to the companies that I speak with is around how do you architect the delivery model. Most of what we see now are SaaS consumption models. And at the end of that 3-year or 5-year contract, there's a renewal event. And if there's not a clear recognition of the value realized, there is no renewal event. So to me, the focus has got to be on what we do post-sale to deliver value and see that those end customers realize value from the idea that we planned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it is, when you get into the details, it's a need to remain current with your customers in the operating environment in which they live and do business. And it's not, coming to your earlier point, just deploying technology and believe that it's going to be adopted at some point in time. No, the world is too competitive for that model anymore. That does not exist. You need to provide them with the products and the services that they want, that allows them to purchase them in a manner that they want. That's the convenient aspect, to allow them to communicate in a manner and on the channels that they want and that they're familiar with, and allow, in doing so, you also want to put yourself in position to take advantage of all that data in the background so that you can understand their behavior. And so that, I'm going to go back to Craig's point, it's never over, right? I mean, it's going to continue. So you can take that data, utilize it in house to develop and to plan for whatever that next phase is. You have to be prepared for tomorrow. When you think it's over, if you anticipate it coming to a conclusion, I think you're high risk to missing the mark. You need to understand that it's a perpetual journey.
Yeah, and I think, when you start talking about data and analyzing, looking at, obviously that's where things like machine learning and AI and all those kind of things come in. But it's they come in terms of being able to generate the value and being able to help solve an issue. But you often hear people, oh, we're going to AI, blockchain, That's the answer to everything, right? But what's the problem you're trying to solve first, right?
I think, Kevin, with that, we've run into, right, one of the big gaps there, when even over the last 5 years, there's not like a obvious quant role for somebody who interprets the data. And one of the things that make this the unending ball game is that the data, once you start collecting data and creating the big data lake or whatever is the approach, this is piling up here. This is an enormous amount of data, and very few organizations are set up to really take advantage of the data. Kind of connected with that is the very few organizations are really set up for the security that's associated with this. And because of all the handoffs with all of this, you're very open and vulnerable to the security issues of the day. And I think the other piece here is that more and more organizations are recognizing the red ocean, blue ocean bit, that the customer who has been the legacy customer for the last 50 years is not the same customer for the next 50, or maybe not even the next 5. So what does that customer want? And how do you react to those very quickly? Again, this is all part of the planning to understand, so that you can understand what data sets do you really need to go forward.
Yeah, and I think obviously, with the horrific situations with ransomware, and what that's done in, like in my country, in Ireland, the health services were in the middle of a pandemic, were shut down because of ransomware, right? And it's in many ways that you can have, you can spend, billions or whatever silly number, but it actually comes down to your weakest link, and it comes back to people as well. And we've all heard the stories of the person clicking on the link for their FedEx have their bunch of flowers outside, or whatever the answer, whatever the thing is. But I heard somebody recently say the amount of money that you spend on security needs to be relative to the value of your data. And that's not just on the technical part of cybersecurity, but it's on the people, the culture. The culture is, we recently, over the last, earlier this year, we went through our ISO 27001 audit, and actually what really enforces is the you're constantly kind of aware of security, any kind of change, any kind of product roadmap, it's embedded within what we do now. It's part and parcel of what you're thinking about. In the same way as if you're doing software and you're thinking about performance, it needs to be ingrained in the culture and what people think. And it's not easy, but it's a case of just having to be, I guess, vigilant. I noticed there's a couple of questions coming in, one from actually both from people called David, but I think one of them, Craig, talks about future-proofing your architecture and how it'll accommodate future technology. I think one of the things that, and I'm talking specifically in the telco space, which in some ways is a little bit more mature than quite a few other sectors, but I think, the concept of standards, the concept of open APIs, the concept of how do you, future-proof yourself, so that, for example, I'm able to when you're talking about the ecosystem, yes, you need to define the relationships between the partners, but guess what? Data has to flow between them as well. So, I guess throw it out there in terms of, from a down at the, let's say, at the technical level now. How do you think about that from both, let's say, a business architecture and even an enterprise architecture above that? Anybody?
Yeah, actually, yeah, both Davids are kind of hinting around the whole, what's the best approach here to manage the change and evolution of all of this. I think what we found is that the classic architectures of classic stacks inevitably get you caught in building stacks that are associated with specific products and services. And so that needed to be knocked on its side as time went on, so that you have a various set of quote open architectures that allow you to plug and play different pieces. I think David Sharman's was talking about syndicated products. Obviously, within each of these ecosystems, there's both an inclination to standardize and create a common view so that you don't have to educate the B2B to X every time you're coming up with a different approach. And so the ecosystems do tend to work together on kind of syndicated product approaches to think about this. But the idea is to understand how architectures, I know you've got Mike on the call and so on, you've got people who have been thinking about business architectures and technical architectures and market architectures. And the trick here is, how do you align all three? And this has not really been done so much in the past. It was very much thought of, as you just posed it, as a technical stack problem, but it's really not a future-proof of just technical stack. It's a future-proof of what's your business architecture, what's your technical architecture, and what's your market architecture on a go-forward basis.
And I think it goes back to recognizing that it's a perpetual journey. Um, this makes this transformation or these initiatives difficult. There's no single state or completion state, and so from an investment point of view, from an architectural design point of view, from a cybersecurity point of view, you must have expectations and an understanding that while you want to remain open with the sole goal of being flexible, because the world continues to change around us faster than it ever has at some point in time. So you can find yourself antiquated pretty quickly and not being able to deliver particular products or services that your customers may require. And so going back to understanding and ensuring that from board of directors all across senior level executives all the way through operations, engineering, finance, what have you, have an understanding that really what you're talking about is continuing to evolve the business. And so you are going to you must have an understanding and that you will show up, you will return with the need to make future investments, even at an open architecture, because you're going to need to make upgrades at some point in time, and it may be for different reasons. And I think having that understanding is terribly important.
Yeah, I think
Through it.
William, let me ask you. I mean, what I am used to in dealing with everyone is that 80% of your IT budget is really just continuing business as usual IT stacks. Only 20% is moving forward. Is how do you manage architectures and plug and play, and what does integration look like in the future? Do you see that shifting, that allocation of budget?
Oh
Uh,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it used to be typical business models. You could anticipate, you would usually drive your budget based on the depreciation of hardware, and at some point in time, when you hit that mark, then you would say, for this year, we may need to upgrade 3, 5, 10, 15% of our servers or our technology. Well, you could still be in the beginning phase with a great deal of appreciation still left on the books for hardware or particular facets of technology, but nonetheless find yourself with an unavoidable requirement to pull it out and to replace it with other and advanced technology. Why? Not that it's depreciated, but to remain competitive and to drive your company forward, you've got to be prepared to do that. And if people don't understand that, then that's gonna, will make that journey a bit more challenging.
I think Alan Speed asked a good question. What is the business problem to be solved? I mean, Alan, if you look at the Fortune 500 from 10 years ago, and then look at it today, those companies don't want to be Ubered or DoorDashed out of business. There are transformations taking effect that are going to disintermediate current business models. So the business problem to be solved is to survive and thrive. And that's why embracing digital transformation is a key to that survival. And not only embracing it, but doing it in a very systematic and correct way that embraces the complexity and thinks all the way through the value chain, from the concept to the delivery of a service to the end customer. I think that's the business problem that those that are embracing digital transformation are in fact trying to solve.
Yeah, I think the other point about it is you, I think well, not even historically, when I talk to people, a lot of times they're not spending enough time on the strategy and the design side of things. You know, there was an interesting report, I think it was just from last year, from Boston Consulting Group, where they were talking about, and they looked at a range of business ecosystems that failed. And 85% of those that failed because of poor design,
Mm.
right? It wasn't because they didn't have a good idea. It wasn't because it wasn't because of poor execution. It was because they didn't design how that ecosystem was working. And actually, of that 85%, 35% is due specifically to governance. So a bit to the point that a couple of, we talked about governance can be at the data level, but it can also be, as John was saying, it's well and good signing a big handshake with a partner, but then how is this thing going to operate? How do we post agreement or post sale? How is this going to work, right? So that whole concept isn't just about, hey, we signed the partner, or we're now, we've got Microsoft as a partner, or whatever. It's how the heck is it going to work afterwards, and how is everybody within that ecosystem going to make money? Because if you've got an 800-pound gorilla that's hammering the crap out of everybody in there, it's not going to survive.
So Kevin, you make a good point. I would view it as not 85% failed, 15% of digital transformations, which we know are hard, they succeeded. And they succeeded by the insight of those writers, because they planned, because they had strategic thinking. I think it's almost like the glass half empty versus full. 15% successfully transformed because they did the best practices.
Yeah. Well, I think you've also had if we were having this webinar 18 months ago, 2 years ago, there'd be far less people would be as familiar with the term digital transformation than they are today. And that's obviously for the unfortunate situation of the pandemic. But organizations the whole planning around, what was never possible is now reality, right? In terms of suddenly everybody can work at home. Before, no, sorry, you can't do that. That's not, no way, it never work, right? And that's a simplistic one. But also going from the expression, like going from bricks to clicks, right? It has happened, right? But people have compromised certain things to get to this point, and now there's a bunch of technical debt and business debt and other things that people are going to have to sort out, because for that new normality. But it has accelerated things and really fast tracked some of this design. But I think longer term, post pandemic, you've got to be careful.
It's a good point. One of the things that we enjoy about advanced 360 solutions and not showing up with cookie cutter solutions, and combined with Transformation Accelerator, is it keeps the right stakeholders, the needs at the table. It forces and supports a continuous collaboration of efforts and focus. One of the things that you cannot afford to do is to create a strat plan and think it's done, or never revisit it and let the ink dry and you're done. Now, the continuous reviewing and updating and modifying of your strat plan is paramount these days. At some frequency, you need to come back and think about, not only are you on track relative to your strat plan, but now forward looking at things that we anticipated doing. When you consider the ecosystem, the environment, the market, those things that we plan to do, are they still applicable, right? Or maybe we need to modify and go north or south or left or right, or making investments in different areas. And that's back to the planning part. You must continuously do and forecast planning. It's not just technology today, but keeping the investments where your personnel can keep a foot into the core business, but the right people can also stay forward thinking, and they can anticipate some of the changes coming down their way, so that they can correctly factor them in. You cannot afford, proactive is the key. You cannot afford to be reactive in today's world. It's terribly expensive to be in that position.
Yeah, totally agree, William, with that. The forward thinking of commodity driven, so almost everything digital can be commoditized and will be commoditized, right? There's a race to zero there. So how do you make money in a commodity digital transformation world? Where is the value? What do you do in this? Do you glue all the pieces together and you get good at glue? Do you do you get good at just engaging people at a different level, but still using commodity priced services? These are, I think, the type of, before, when you would sit in with the executives, you would do a good, bad day, medium day scenario set, and you go, okay, well, on a good day, it'd be this, on a bad day, it'd be this. This is a lot more nuanced, I think, than ever before, right? And it's this, and yet the cost per storage, the cost per processing, quantum, not that far away at this point in the ball game.
Right.
And so on, you go, okay, well, what are the commodity pieces that I can leverage to create more value? And again, without having a core plan and being able to manipulate that, it's very difficult to, otherwise you're just betting on gut feel again, which is not necessarily the best approach here.
And sometimes it's simple and works.
Moment around the willingness to take risk or create an environment for safe risk taking. I have a friend that advises on corporate venturing, and those are the very kind of investments that are going to reveal these opportunities to transform an aspect of the way that you do business. I spent 3 years within HP as a startup, and we had a culture that we purposely put in place for safe risk taking. Every quarter, we would celebrate the failure of one of our country managers. And we laughed about it, but we also learned what not to do. And it was that invested you with a confidence to try different things. And I don't know that aspect exists in every company. Maybe those 15% of successes were companies that had the right cultural alignment to foster and incubate the transformation. So I do think, though, that culture is still an essential piece. And if employees don't feel safe taking risks, they're not going to.
No, and you look also at, generations, younger than us, who are gamers, and the whole purpose of gaming is you fail very, very often. You play the game, you lose, you learn from it, and you go again, right? So the classic of fail fast, and you learn from that, but in a controlled way. And going back to what you were saying as well, William, and again, from a practical point of view, I think what you often see is people, it's almost like, it's a bit like almost in some ways like some business processes as well, is people spend a whole bunch of time creating their strategic plan or their business process or whatever, or their customer journey maps. And then they leave them there, and they're not looked at. Nobody talks about them or does anything for, oh geez, yeah, we got to do the planning for next year. Let's look at it again. They need to be living, breathing elements. And I think in some way, I think what we're all advocating is this kind of concept, whether it's actually a digital transformation office or if it's a loosely coupled group, that they need to be able to understand that. And in some ways, they're almost superseding the company vision, because the company vision has to come from that thought process about overall how we're going to transform as an organization. And I think, you know, we talk about, there's a couple of questions about, you know, quantum computing and Web 3.0. Well, you know, 5 years ago, it was big data was the biggest thing ever, right? And that was the answer to everything. And now we're talking, you know, it's AI and will be quantum and will be Web 3.0, and it'll be other things as well. But it's constantly evolving. And it's not the change, it's the way you deal with the change is the problem. The other point I was going to say, there's a question as well in from Brian about the impact of IoT, IoE, and 5G. And what I've seen on that side is it's certainly from a telco point of view, it's really clouding the boundaries between different sectors. Because, you know, if you look at the telecom sector with 5G, in order to get their ROI and the return on that, it isn't going to be through selling to the consumers. They're looking at other verticals. They're looking at completely different business models, and they have to in order for it to define. So that's part of to me, the evolution, and you know, IoT and, you know, all of those things as well play a very important role. But I know we're running out of time, and I can see Ed is in here to keep us honest.
Yeah, so great conversation. I think it's been very enlightening. And so maybe what I'd like to suggest to wrap up here is, you know, is to have each of the panelists just, you know, give your top 3 pieces of advice that you would give to the audience, just to, you know, hey, here's where I would start, here's what I would look at, and just some you know, quick points of advice that you'd like to leave the audience with. So John, why don't you start us off?
Sure, I would start off saying that, as I said at the beginning, you've got to embrace complexity. If you don't, you overlook the things that are going to bring the realization of value to your customer, whether that's a 1-to-1 sale or a 12-to-1 sale. You really have to embrace the complexity of the modern world in order to add value. The other is culture, right? And it's an important aspect of any one of these transformations to have a culture that not only rewards risk taking, but that also is aware of what might cause conflict. You know, the Hofstede product that we partnered with started off doing mergers and acquisitions. When a company was acquiring 2 divisions, how well would those 2 divisions work together? The problem is infinitely harder when there's a dozen companies that have to collaborate on what the collective culture of the solution looks like. And then the last thing is that, you know, new models of consumption are SaaS based, and the SLAs, these darn customers, are actually asking for financial remedies if you don't hit your SLAs and uptimes. If you don't contemplate what the collective solution and a collective SLA looks like with all of your partners, everybody's going to end up paying penalties. So you've really got to look downstream at what is adding value and how to avoid the things that are going to actually cause you to fail.
All right. Okay. How about you, William?
Yeah, those are
Thanks,
great,
John.
John, by the way. The things that come to my mind is I'll go back to planning. You've got to have not just a plan, but an endorsed plan. You have to have a well-developed plan with goals, with funding requirements, timelines, defined risks, with top-down consensus on what digital transformation even means before you get started. I mean, again, you cannot start this without having some consensus around this. If you're going back down the hallway to visit your CFO, or your line item in the budget is being discussed in the boardroom and you're requiring more funding and they thought it was done, then that's going to be a challenging conversation for the next subsequent quarters. If they think it's done in Q2 and you've got 4 or 5 more quarters to go, that's going to be tough on any corporation. So having a well-developed plan is important. Don't forget about your business partners, your vendors. Have full alignment there. John referenced culture. Bring them into your culture. Understand their culture, and make sure that there's good, solid collaboration and understanding, and ensuring that they're able to support your business and some of the goals that you're trying to achieve. And then expectations. This is a never-ending journey. This is not a transaction. So everyone involved understanding the expectations and the outcomes, the business value associated while you're taking this on is also super important.
All right, great. Thank you, William. All right, Craig.
How do you follow that? Back to the, no, I think the biggest thing is obviously the alignment of the business, the technology, and the market approach. These are the three things that in the digital world have the potential to get ahead or behind. And especially if you're dealing, as John points out, in series of ecosystems. So trying to align the business, the technology, and the market just in one company is tough. Trying to do it across 12 companies, across 3 products, and so on is really tough. But this is where, without doing a shameless plug for for Kevin, the modeling of this has become a critical new tool to understand this, and also so that you understand not only cultures, but where the incentives are for people to support this thing, and what do the outcomes do for everybody. So that's the lead behind here. But
Okay.
happy to answer any other questions offline here.
Great. All right, Kevin.
Yeah, I think one of the other important points is don't look at, there's a lot of resources out there that people can use. There's a lot of, standards. There's a lot of elements that people can look at and leverage, whether it's using anything from for example, a business model canvas to understand a discussion, or, to have a discussion with your partner in an ecosystem. That's really important. Also, to give one of the attendees a plug here, Mike White who's a key person for the Business Architecture Guild, who have really done tremendous work in the area of reference models around business capabilities and understanding what are the capabilities a business needs. So looking, and even things like, do searches on things like maturity models, because as part of your journey, sometimes you kind of figure out, well, where am I? Where do I want to go? What's the gap, and how do I figure that? But so one of the kind of first point was think about, research what's out there. Don't necessarily reinvent the wheel. And also the other point is thinking, as I said before, from the outside in. It's very much have the concept that you're a startup, right? And that's what your project is. You need to think about first, what's the problem I'm trying to solve? Who, that my customer has? What's the value proposition to them? How are we going to get that mark to them? Who do I need from a partner's point of view? So that whole concept, before you even get to the how is the easy piece if you do everything else. If you understand, who's involved, why you want to do it, what your customer wants as the end result, how they're going to measure success, how they're going to generate, who's required to generate the value, then the how becomes easy. Whether it's quantum, computing, whether it's IoE, IoT, I don't want to say is irrelevant, but they're just the enablement. They're the 20%. The rest is much more important. And the last thing is, none of this will exist without people. So resources and treating your team and working on that culture is so critical.
All right, great. What a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure that we probably could have gone on for 2 hours, on this topic. So I want to thank all the panelists for a great conversation. A lot of value and a lot of great advice has been shared with the audience, and so thank you very much. So just before we close off, I just want to remind everybody that this has been recorded, and we will be making the recording available to you in the next day. Here is all the contact information for all of the panelists, and please feel free to reach out to any of them and get further information, ask questions. They're all willing to work with you and help. All right, so with that, thank you all for attending, and I hope it was a valuable session for you, and look forward to talking to you again, and expect to see the recording in your email in the next day. All right, thanks everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.